Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Way is in Training. This is a podcast exploring how warriors should train and fight, as well as how they should live. We will talk about technique, but we'll also dive deep into fitness, mindset, and strategy. We will explore leadership and philosophy as well. So whether you are a young soldier, a veteran police officer, a responsible armed citizen, or simply someone looking for an authentic life, let's examine how the lessons of combat and preparation for it can help us fulfill our potential. Let's explore the way together and learn how the discipline of training can show us our true selves amidst the chaos of life.
Hey everybody, welcome back. I've got my friend Chris Workman, the NCOIC of the action shooting team of the AMU, back on for another podcast. We're just going to see where the conversation takes us, talk about shooting and training and all kinds of things in that vein. So real quick, Chris, for the guys that missed the other time, why don't you give people a little bit of a background on you?
Yeah, so real quick breakdown. We talked about a lot of stuff on that last podcast. I think it was episode 210. But background, I got into the Army in 2008. I served at 3rd Battalion, 75th Ranger Regiment for about 12 years. Until 2020-ish, July timeframe, and then transitioned over to the Army Marksmanship Unit, in which I was primarily in an instructor role for the instructor training group. And then I left there this year in about April, that team specifically, and then took over the action shooting team for the Army Marksmanship Unit.
Yeah, that's good stuff. That's where, for the people that aren't into competitive shooting, a lot of the biggest names in USPSA have come out of that unit in the last 20, 30 years.
Yeah Travis Tomasi, Shane Coley, who's team captain for Glock, and he does a lot of other work there as well for Glock. You got who have Max Michelle,
Casey Eusebio, all those guys.
Yeah, there's Danny Horner,
Yep.
There's a ton of talent that comes out of the action shooting team.
And it's a huge, like you said, a huge amount of talent, like athletic talent. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that a lot of people that don't really pay attention to the military don't really realize is there's opportunities for competitive athletes. Pretty much there's a lot of opportunities in the military for that. Mm-hmm. And it's something that the military is actually pretty good for.
Yeah. Yep. So for the action team in particular, they've actually got 2 jobs. So our mission statement, one of them is compete and win. And then the other is to provide lethality to the force. So they utilize, everything that they've learned on the competitive side, and then impart all those lessons learned on what's actually practical, and then usable for guys going down range. So for action, they're typically training, guys up at Bragg, guys out at Dam Neck, and some stuff like that. So they're usually requested by name for specific units and specific people. So yeah, they train about, I would say, action. So we've got a team of about 9 guys that they train anywhere from like 450 to 550 soldiers a year. So ITG, it's a little bit different. So that's the instructor training group. They train about 4,000 soldiers a year, and that's only a team of like 10 guys. So
larger class sizes and probably more line soldiers as opposed to more soft type applications.
Yeah. So a lot larger groups. They have a lot of turnkey courses and classes that they can provide, but basically a commander can contact them and request specific training. Like, hey, we want to do concealed carry training. We want a mixture or a hybrid of basic rifle marksmanship and short range marksmanship. And so we design a POI to kind of meet those needs and the commander's intent, and then give them, round counts and all that stuff as far as like break down daily kind of what we're going to do, and then go from there.
So I got a question for you that just kind of popped into my head, since we're going to kind of free flow in our conversation here.
Yeah.
because this is something that I saw throughout my career. But as you pointed out before we actually started the podcast, I'm old and I've been retired a while.
Yeah.
So, competitive shooting kind of informed shooting for special operations for a long time, right? And it kind of filtered down from the SMUs down to, SF groups and the battalions. So how have you seen that progression continue in the 10 years or so I've been retired? I would imagine it's gone a lot further downstream than it used to be.
Yeah, 100%. So, I mean, there's still some kind of naysayers out there, which I kind of find interesting. But if we're talking about performance-based shooting, we have to utilize quantifiable metrics. And I think Frank Proctor broke it down pretty well. But, everything's quantifiable when you're shooting USPSA or anything like that, where the scores are hit or the scores are, hits. And then as far as like accuracy goes, so that's a standard and that's a metric that needs to be measured. So your accuracy and then your speed. So all that stuff, it's trickling down to like range 37. That's been that way for a long time. So all those, they call them CTEs, so critical task evaluations. So before they even go in the shoot house, they have, I think it's down to a week now. But for that schoolhouse, what they end up doing is a week of marksmanship density. And then at the end of that week, they get tested on a bunch of random CTEs, which are CQB based. And then they're evaluated on that. And if you don't pass it, like, you're not moving on to the next gate.
Yeah. And I like the fact that, because it's something I've talked about a lot, and I kind of got a lot of it from Frank myself, because he's a guy that got me started down the competition path back in the day in 20th Group. Is shooting is a skill where everything is solid data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we're not talking about the tactics or the application of shooting, but the actual shooting skill itself.
Yeah.
It's all quantifiable. You can measure it all and see what works and what doesn't work for pure shooting skill. Mm-hmm. Obviously, decision making and TTPs are a different story, but that's not what we're talking about.
No.
Just the actual skills of pulling the trigger and lining the sights up fast and reliably. Well, there's really nothing you can't measure.
I think Mike Pannone said it best. He was saying, somebody was on Instagram kind of arguing with him about competition versus tactical shooting, and he was like, there's no such thing. Shooting is shooting. The application of marksmanship can be tactical in nature, but there's no such thing as tactical shooting. And so, and my example that I use is, like, let's say on a macro level, like a fix and a finish. So you set in an intermediate support by fire, you fix the enemy, and then maneuver an element to assault that, their position. So something like that in nature can be, tactical, but that's, SOPs and TTPs really.
Yeah. And people confuse, I think a lot, people confuse the hard skills with the application of the skills. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's these phrases that get thrown around a lot in our community, right? And one of them that makes me absolutely insane, like it makes my brain cry and my soul bleed, is train like you fight. Because nobody in any sort of athletic endeavor actually does that. Nobody trains for the USC by sparring full contact every time. Nobody trains for football by putting on the pads and scrimmaging every single practice session, right? Because it's counterproductive. You got to train the attributes and skills you need. And that's kind of the same way I think these guys are thinking about, so-called tactical shooting versus practical shooting. They think it's somehow different because they're thinking about the application of the skill, not the skill itself. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Plus, it's, in my opinion, it's okay to make mistakes. I mean, even downrange, as long as they're very small. But the forum to make a ton of mistakes and learn a ton is on the range. And it's kind of funny. After our last podcast, I actually ended up reading that book, The 5 Rings.
Yeah.
And it was pretty interesting, just talking about just a way of life and trying to dedicate your life to training, and then I wouldn't say not really having a technique, but your proficiency levels are so good that you can adjust your technique whenever necessary. And that's kind of where I think guys need to be. And so, where you need to learn that and work on proficiency is on the range.
Well, and if you think about it, I think you kind of hit on something else that's really big too, is that competition gives you a venue to fail without real consequence.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah.
Whereas in the real thing, you can't afford the failure. Like you've got to make those mistakes to learn and grow. And that whole idea of you can't make a mistake in training, that kind of zero defect mentality.
Yeah.
And that used to be pretty big in the Army too. Yeah. I remember that back in the day. But it's not the way to master a skill.
No. Yeah, you kind of got to push it enough to see where the wheels fall off. And then, if you look at mistakes objectively and then, implement some stuff to prevent that from happening again, it's only going to make you better.
Yeah. And I think you need to seek failure to get better.
Yeah,
like you should be failing in training. If you're not pushing yourself enough.
Yeah. What's the growth mindset versus the fixed mindset mentality? So, and if for any of the listeners that don't know what that is, the fixed mindset is where guys are so scared to fail, they're afraid to even try anything new, as opposed to the growth mindset where they know failure is definitely a potential and they're okay with it. And you'll never be able to seek greatness unless you're willing to fail.
And I think there's a bigger paradigm there too, like a bigger paradigm shift. Because a lot of the people that I've seen that have had like a fixed mindset about things feel like it's all about talent. I'm as good as I am. It's not about improvement. Mm-hmm. Whereas the growth mindset don't really care that much about talent, natural talent. They care about how good can I get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And discipline and learning new skills and new things. Yep.
Well, and like back to the 5 rings analogy, right? And this is another big buzzword, the process focus versus outcome focus, right? Just like growth versus fixed. But I really do think that the key is focusing on the habits and patterns of behavior you need to do to get better rather than on getting better itself.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a big thing for competitive shooting too, where I've seen it a lot where like guys just focus on the outcome. So the results on the match. And typically those guys don't end up doing very well. Now it's nice. Like I like winning, but that's not really the objective. It's just to continuously get better every single match, or like, every time you go out to the range, just get a little bit better every single time, or learn something new every single time.
I think it was, who was it? Which MMA fighter? Oh, it was the little leprechaun.
Like Conor McGregor.
Conor McGregor. Either I win or I learn. But that's a great quote. It really is, because if you look at it that way, it takes kind of that overbearing mental pressure to succeed off of you, and you can become just about the act of performing itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wonder though, do you think he meant by winning he wasn't learning anything either? I'm kind of curious.
If he did mean it that way, I don't think that's the right way to look at it.
No, 100%.
Yeah, I think you learn either way. But I still liked it because it took the negativity out of a loss.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I think there's such a big stigma around it. That guys think that it's so unacceptable that they're not willing to take risks. And but that's why I like shooting. Even if you're doing really, really well, or let's say you're going out and you're just crushing a ton of big matches, there's so many little nuances you can still work on, and so many different disciplines you can pursue. And like, that's kind of my thing, is I like shooting, everything. I like shooting some long gun stuff. I love shooting the short range stuff mostly. And then, I primarily shoot USPSA and like carbine stuff, but I love shooting all of it. So there's so many different things you can pursue with marksmanship.
And I mean, I cannot think of even like stages of a match where I felt like I crushed it.
Mm-hmm.
It still wasn't done. Like, there's always something that could have been better.
Yeah,
there's always something that could have been improved.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's almost like doing a drill at the range, where if you run a drill, a couple times, you can progressively get a little bit faster on that drill, or you realize like, oh, I'm actually seeing everything that I need to see pretty easily, pretty clearly. I'm getting really, really good hits marksmanship wise. Like I can start speeding it up.
And I think that's so, and this is kind of a complex topic, right? Because there's logistical limitations to using hit factor in institutional training.
Yeah, I think we talked about that last podcast.
Yeah. But I love the fact that when you're looking at things from like a hit factor perspective, there's no upper ceiling.
No.
When you have like par times and points, but there's a pass fail par time, there's not really any measurement beyond passing the drill.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, and I think that's like a common misconception too with like USPSA, where people are like, well, yeah, it's time heavy based, as far as the scoring goes, and that couldn't be further from the truth. If you want to be fast, you want to be competitive, you've got to be fast and accurate. You just can't be squirting bullets all over the place and dropping points. You got to be fast and accurate, and then you can't make mistakes too often, because the guys that are at the top levels, they are not making mistakes. They're dropping very little deltas, almost no mics, and they're hanging a lot of alphas and a lot of charlies, and so you can't be just going out there just shooting bullets inaccurately but really, really fast and think you're going to be competitive.
Well, look at like Eric Graffel. I forget which. It wasn't World Shoot, but it was an international match before World Shoot, one of the recent ones. He shot like 3 Charlies the whole match.
Yeah,
international lipstick match.
Yep.
And that's just insane, because there's a lot of difficult shots in those matches.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. IPSC, I think, is a little more technical for the most part compared to USPSA, but I would highly recommend shooting it, because typically and technical, I mean, as far as like the target presentations and arrays, not necessarily the stage planning. The stage planning stuff is usually a little bit easier, because you end up showing up to the match and you can't walk the stages a day prior. Like you can only do it when you're there shooting and you're actively about to go shoot that. So you and your squad only have 3 minutes or so to walk that stage, and then you've got to memorize your stage plan and execute it.
Yeah, I haven't shot any IPSC. I just, I've shot a lot of USPSA, I've shot a lot of IDPA. But the things I see of IPSC when I watch like the videos on YouTube, I really like it. Like it seems like a really good. I like the variety of stage sizes. I like kind of the flavor of it.
Yep. Yeah, it's typically a little bit easier as far as the stage planning, I think, like I said, but the only differences really between that and USPSA is you can't move out of the shooting areas. So, you can't cross fault lines to, cheat on some of the distance to cut corners and stuff like that. You have to stay inside the shooting area. And then typically when you start in the start position, you have to be looking straight down range, at the back berm. You can't be looking at that first target, at least with your head and your body turned towards that target. It's really the only difference.
So I have a question for you. Mm-hmm. Back to the AMU.
Yeah.
Because this is something I've thought about a lot the last couple of years. Because I would imagine, I don't know, but I would imagine that an AMU USPSA athlete has pretty much an unlimited ammo supply for training, I would think. Effectively so, right?
Yeah, almost. We've got a cap for sure, and that's due to budget. So yeah, how that kind of works is typically at the end of the year, we go through all of our ammo numbers, and it's just like it's almost like the budget itself, where they look at the budget, and if you didn't spend, let's say they gave you $100,000, and for FY25 you didn't spend it, you only spent 80,000. They're going to cut 20% off the top for the next year. So you really need to look at it and make sure that you're getting your quarterly draws, and then you're using that ammo that you requested from the previous year, because if you don't, we're not going to get it back. So the difference between AMU though, and other units is all of our ammo. Well, I wouldn't say all of it, but I would say 95% of it is commercial ammo. So we buy all of our ammo. Typically how that works is just like any other Army contract. We figure out what the loads are for the competitors' guns, and then they take that load data and then submit it for a contract. And then ammo manufacturers bid on that contract, and then whoever gets it, that's who we buy ammo through.
So, kind of, my question on this is, what do you think as a ballpark amount, an ideal round count and live fire for the year for a competitor would be? Since you kind of see all these top guys on a regular basis.
It depends, what level, so if you're talking AMU level, you got to be shooting 80,000 rounds a year, probably somewhere in there, to stay at that level. So, but you look at guys like Jay Beal, and he's doing primarily dry fires, and he's relatively competitive. He's really competitive. So I think it kind of depends. You can accomplish a lot with dry fire. I think it depends on the level of commitment to dry fire, how intense you're doing it and how often, how frequently, because you can get a lot out of dry fire without shooting live rounds, and then without the financial commitment.
And how honest you're being in your dry fire too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because kind of how I see dry fire is that's almost like the quiz or the pre-test, and then you go out and you verify, what you were doing during dry fire, during live fire. But all that stuff has to come together. You gotta utilize what you're doing in dry fire, and then apply that in dry fire and live fire. So let's say you go out to the range and you come back and you're like, well, I'm kind of hosing through these. I'm kind of transitioning through these targets super fast. Am I actually capable of doing that? So that's where the honesty comes in, but I think you can get a ton out of dry fire, a ton.
Now, have you guys played around with any of the new virtual reality things?
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah. So, and that's something that's kind of different with the AMU. So one of the other things we have involvement in is prototyping and development for the Army. So that can look pretty different depending on what's required. But we have the customs firearms shop, so they do a lot of prototyping and development on guns specifically. And then we also have the load development room, where they do mostly ballistic testing, terminal testing, grouping, things like that. But yeah, we've messed around with some of that stuff. I think not ACE specifically, even though I've heard that's a great program. I haven't used that personally, but I've heard really, really good things from people that compete quite a bit, and they say it's highly beneficial. Now I think it was the virtual squad trainer, the VST. That's something that the Army, I think, was looking at for quite some time to replace the EST. And so, yeah, we've messed around with that a little bit, and I've kind of got some criticisms of the current EST, but I'll kind of keep my mouth shut on that one, I think.
Well, and there's also the Vertra, which I did a little bit of stuff with on the police department.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And the ACE, I use the ACE a lot. I like it a lot.
Yep.
It's like dry fire with feedback where you have to be honest.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. And I know there's guys, you'll see videos and stuff online where like guys are cheating some of the drills so you can shoot through walls and stuff like that, like glitches in the matrix, I guess. And and that's fine. And I think shooting's the same way. Like there's some things that some guys are just capable of or that can do during a competitive match. But like, what are your personal goals? What's your personal goal? Just to see your name at the top of the scoreboard? Then I guess that's fine. But if you just want to improve, then, just look at your own personal times. And I think that it's the same for competitive shooting, where, you should set some initial goals when you first start out. Like, hey, I want to make B class, okay, I want to make B class in a year. And then, after that year, it's like, okay, I made B class, I want to make A class, and so on. And then once you get to like, M and GM, It's a little bit more competitive. It's a lot harder. And then start looking at the actual matches and the scores and start telling yourself, like, I want to start winning some locals and then, start going out to some state matches and area matches. And like, I want to be top 10, top 5.
So here's another thing that we should talk about for a minute. The separation in USPSA for like the top 10 guys is sliced so thin.
Yeah.
Like it's such a small separation. And, talking about developing skill versus application of skill, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like 1 through 10 in a USPSA match, if it was an actual fight, it's probably a roll of the dice.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Which isn't a criticism by any means, not at all.
Yeah, I think that just means those guys are so good and they're so proficient, and they just don't make mistakes enough to separate those top guys by a huge percentage or huge margin enough. I mean, it happens too, at matches between, A-class shooters and stuff, especially if they're like real similarly matched. You can look at the scores and some of those are only separated by, less than 1%, half a percentage point. And so that's why I like practice score competitor, because, you'll go out and shoot a match and then make a mistake and you can get into practice score competitor and kind of edit your scores and look at it and be like, well, how much did this mistake cost me? And that actually happened to me out at Tennessee Atomic Blast a couple years ago, where there's a real fast hoser stage and I ended up not fumbling a reload, but I couldn't hit my mag catch.
Yeah.
And it probably only cost me, 0.3 of a second. a third, 0.3, something like that. But just that little mistake dropped me, I think, like 3 or 4 places. 3 or 4 places, something like that. Just that tiny mistake, 0.3 of a second. So yeah, it's kind of interesting. Like once you start getting into it, breaking some of the numbers down.
Well, and it goes back to all the data being quantifiable, right?
Yeah.
You can actually mine the data and figure out exactly what cost you what and where you could have done better and how you could have improved.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. I like it. It's a fun game. There's so much stuff you can work on. So much different stuff.
So here's another question for you. If anybody out there, and I think most of my listeners are a little bit older than who would be looking to join the AMU,
Mm-hmm.
but in case somebody out there is young enough and is thinking about taking that path for themselves, how do they go about getting in the AMU?
So it's a little bit different for different teams, but typically, let's say, for example, they wanted to join that action shooting team. So the action shooting team, they compete in the disciplines of precision rifle, 3-gun, USPSA. So I would highly recommend going out and shooting matches. And then once you start placing fairly well, then submit a packet to the AMU action shooting team and we'll take a look at your scores. So, I don't think any of the competitive teams are going to hire somebody that hasn't been doing that, because the goals are to win matches, especially big area matches and nationals and podium at those. And then the same goes for any of the Olympic disciplines as well. So the intent is to have those shooters probably get developed for a year or 2 and then be an Olympic hopeful.
So I would imagine you guys probably have recruiters that are specifically looking at athletes and trying to bring them on.
Yeah, we do that as well. So typically we'll look for those people as civilians. And if they're placing and doing really, really well, we will approach them and ask them if they want to join the Army. So typically how that would work is that person would join the Army with a specific contract that says once they get through basic and AIT, or OSIT, I guess it's now called, they would go directly to the AMU afterwards. And typically we'll give them the option to pick their MOS as well. A lot of the guys are members of AMU. They'll usually go with 11 Bravo infantry just because that's the shortest route.
How many people don't make the cut? Like, what's the percentage?
I There's quite a few there. Well, as far as like application wise, we'll look at some applicants, and if they're not cutting it as far as percentage wise goes, we probably won't entertain it. Typically, they need to be placing very, very well, because they have to have the potential to podium or place and then win big area matches and nationals. So
what about once they're on the team?
Yeah, so how it's a little bit different for every team, but every team has gates. So for the first 2 years, typically you're what's known as a developmental shooter. So you have some grace, and that's because those guys have been in AIT and basic for so long. They've been off the gun for a significant amount of time. So we give them some leeway once they get back on the gun, and then start shooting matches. And so those percentages look a little bit different for every team. But for action, the first 2 years, it's 85%. And then once we decide to retain you, it's 90%. And then after your next re-enlistment, it's 95%, and you have to podium and place. So usually top 3 at big matches.
Are there any up and comers right now that people might not have heard of that are on the team?
Yeah, so we actually just hired a new kid. His name is Austin Hull. So he's been shooting, out in the Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina area. So we just hired him. So John Browning, he was our prior limited shooter, very successful shooter, great shooter, but he was primarily shooting limited. So he just retired recently, and to replace him and backfill him, we hired Austin Hull, who's a really great, fantastic production shooter. So he's the new kid on the team.
I've actually heard the name.
Yep. Yeah, and he's been placing really, really well. Typically, he'll place top 5, top 3, big matches, and then he's already been shooting 85%. So he's already making his gates for a developmental shooter, and that's what we call it. But yeah, he's been performing to 85% already prior to us picking him up. So his first big match with Aaron Edens and Jacob Hetherington is going to be what's it called? It's a huge IPSC match down at Volusia County. So it's 30 stages over a couple days. So it's a big match, but that's coming up, I think, at the end of January. Yeah, so this month. So the end of this month down there at Volusia County.
Is that the Extreme Open or something like that?
That's the one, Extreme Open. Yep. Yeah. So yeah, and that's all IPSC. So
all right. Here's another question for you, since I'm shooting rapid fire at you, my friend. What lessons could people take? Say it's a law enforcement guy, or a soft guy, or just a regular civilian competitor. What lessons can they take from training that you've learned from the action shooting side of the AMU? What takeaways could they have that they might not know about, or might be different, or might be different priorities?
All right. That's a pretty broad question. That's a big one too. What I would say from the competitive shooting side, why I think it's applicable is, one, you're getting the reps in that usually the agency, or the military, regardless of branch of service, is able to provide you. So for me, at least, my intent with pursuing competitive shooting was to get the reps necessary to get up to the level of proficiency that I thought was required to go downrange. And because the repercussions downrange, and then, while you're on the beat as a cop, those repercussions are pretty drastic. You could get injured or potentially death, and lack of proficiency. There's some risk involved, right? Especially when there's mistake of fact shootings, or, potentially shooting a civilian. So my thought on it is, you need to be as good as you possibly can with the time allotted to you. And if you need to pursue that on your own, outside of the agency and what resources and time they're willing to provide, you need to do that, because you have an obligation to yourself and your family to do it. So, but I would say the biggest things I kind of took away from competitive shooting was just the mindset. And so what I mean by that is just have an open mindset when it comes to marksmanship, try new things, and The other is, have you heard of OBE, overwhelmed by events?
Yep.
Yeah. So that one kind of relates to the first thing I said. So overwhelmed by events, in my opinion, it comes from lack of reps or experience or a combination of both. So you'll see it in the shoot house when guys are doing CQB runs. They almost go into the black and they kind of don't know what's going on, or they're just so sucked into the optic tube because, they're trying to process a lot more information that they can handle. And so they kind of go into the black and they don't really know what's going on. So the more reps you get on stuff like that, the easier it's going to get. So, and you don't want lack of proficiency, especially when it's like real easy stuff as far as weapons manipulation, mag changes, malfunction clearance, transitioning from primary to secondary. You want all that stuff to be subconscious. So you want to try to commit as much of that to the subconscious as you can, so that it's muscle memory, quote unquote. So you don't have to think about that when it happens downrange or, while you're patrolling. So.
And it's one of those things where if you have to think about the shooting or the weapons handling,
yeah,
you don't have the bandwidth to be aware of your environment or make the other decisions. Like that stuff's all got to run like a background program.
Yeah, for me, I think kind of the big moment for me was I started thinking, like, I don't want to go down range and ever get into a position where I wish I had more training. I wish I had more reps on the gun. So the big thing for me, even at regiment, when I came in, back in 2008, there were all these squad leaders and platoon sergeants that had a ton of CQB time under their belt downrange because they had just been doing back-to-back deployments to Iraq. And they really, really harped on lethality and marksmanship and proficiency. And some of these guys were absolute psychopaths. I mean, they were just like out of their minds. But that the stuff that they prioritized was that. And so, we would go out to the range sometimes, and we would get there around 3 or 4 in the morning. We would run, and this was back in like 2009. So we would run nods and IR green, then we would run white light and optic. And then once it got light out, then we would run just optic. And so that was like back in, 2009 when, guys were starting to do that already back in 2009 before they even started talking about like near peer type stuff. So, when you can't really use lasers because it'll give away your position and all those concerns. Yeah. So we started doing that, and then we actually started doing like some passive and nods even back then. So now is more of a push from our higher level leadership. So, our first sergeant, Rob Phipps, at the time, who was kind of a legend in 375, he was one of the best shooters in the company as the first sergeant, so there was like a guy I really looked up to. But yeah, it's, stuff like that. Back then we were still shooting not enough, in my opinion, even then, to get to the proficiency level that I thought we needed to be at. So obviously, at the company level, you've got a lot of competing requirements, stuff like that, even back then. But now it's almost worse because you've got so much admin stuff to do that pulls you away from the range.
What does, and I know I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but I keep thinking of good questions to ask you, so forgive me. What does the average training routine regimen look like for an AMU action shooting team member? Like, what are they doing? Are they doing PT, then dry fire, then live fire? Are they?
Oh, so what's a day in the life, pretty much?
Yeah, day in the life.
Yeah, it's a bit different now for guys that are at that proficiency level. I feel like a lot of it is kind of maintenance now. And so there's definitely gains to be made, but in my opinion, it's like micro gains. You're maybe getting 0.5% here, 0.5% there, something like that. But Yeah, some of those guys, they're still shooting a lot. I mean, they'll go out, do a lot of movement, and some of that it looks differently for some of them, but typically they'll do some PT. Some of the guys do PT in the afternoon, and that's something that I've kind of been okay with, as long as they're, still passing PT tests and stuff just fine. But they'll come in, and we can't go hot earlier than 9. So they'll get the range hot. And then most of those guys will shoot a couple hundred rounds a day, doing different drills and working on different stuff. And a lot of them are so honest with themselves, where, let's say they went out and shot a match recently and there was some failure point, they'll drill down on that over and over and over until they start getting it right, and then move on. So, or there's stuff that they just want to work on and improve, they'll work that. But typically it's a couple hundred rounds a day, and then Monday through Friday.
What percentage would you say is kind of skills that are isolated, like they're isolating something like a reload or a draw or a target transition, or more like skills in combination, like little miniature stages, things like that? Like what percentage would you say of those is being done?
Okay, that's a good question. So I guess macro versus micro drills, kind of. Yeah. So like El Prez, right? Like, in my opinion, that's a macro drill, because you've got a lot of stuff going on, right? You've got to surrender. You're facing up range. You got to do a turn and draw. You're doing transitions. You're doing splits. Then you have to do a reload and then do the whole thing again, right? So that's like a macro drill. But a lot of them, they'll do, well, so Aaron especially, he'll do a lot of movement type stuff. And typically most of the guys, what they'll do, anything that they're setting up, they'll make it drastically harder than anything they'll see in a match. So it's something else that I kind of found was interesting that they'll do too is, and I try to get out every once in a while, but it's a little bit hard. If I get on the range a couple times a week, I'm happy. But something else they'll do, that I've shot with them before, is they'll set up like a mega stage. It'll have like 25 different targets, walls all over the place, and barrels, and like, all this stuff, vision barriers and whatnot. And so each one of them will take a turn picking like part of that as a stage. And they're like, all right, you got to run it kind of like this. All right, you get 1 or 2 walkthroughs. Okay, run it. And then you have to shoot that, and you have to shoot it really well. And you get 1 or 2 tries, and that's it. And then the next guy will come up with one. So for that, I think it's really, really good as far as being able to come up with a stage plan very, very quickly, committing it to memory, and then being able to execute it efficiently and doing it well. So that's something else that they'll do. So they'll do that every once in a while. So I would say, as far as like big macro drills, I would say that's 90% of the time, as opposed to like, a dedicated, 1 or 2 targets that they're working on. But it kind of depends too. So one of the other missions that we have is training soldiers. So they'll have to transition back and forth to Glocks or something like that, or SIGs. And so if they have a training event with a unit coming up and they know what weapons platforms they're going to be using, they'll get out on the range and train that a little bit, just to knock some of the rust off on running some of those stock guns. Because, as Aaron shoots open mostly, so he's running a really raced out 2011. Jacob, he's running the CZs, which are significantly nicer shooting than, Glocks or the SIGs. So, and some of those guys too, just shooting USPSA, they'll run pistol carbine courses. So they have to get out and knock some of the rust off on the carbines as well. So, they need to be multifaceted.
Makes sense. Makes sense. And I really, like, something I really kind of play around with in my own training. Not that I'm anywhere near these guys' level, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I do some stuff that's kind of similar to what you talked about, where they take pieces of the big stage, and do it like 3 times, do like a different pattern 3 times.
Yep.
And I think that's really good for kind of building that ability in to not make mistakes on colder runs.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, I'll try to do that too sometimes. So even in dry fire, even if it's like the same target array, I'll try to shoot it in a different order. Because you know how it is when you go shoot a stage, some of the target arrays, you can't necessarily shoot those left to right or right to left. You have to be moving in on targets, getting points on the move. using targets to set up on, so that you can shoot the rest of the array, even if you have to transition an extra time, saves you time shooting in on that position or shooting at a position. So yeah, I try to do that just for the cognitive ability too, where you're thinking about shooting these targets in a different manner or a different sequence, and then quickly changing that. And then you have to shoot that a completely different way instead of just doing the same repetition, shooting those targets the same way every single time, shooting those a little differently. That's why I like drills like Accelerator or MXAD. You can shoot those pretty differently every single time.
Yeah, no, I like Accelerator for that too, because you can change up the order you address the targets in every time.
Yeah.
You've got,
I'll even throw out, a small piece of steel or something on Accelerator. But typically if I go out to the range, usually what I'm shooting is doubles at different distances. And then I'm doing some sort of big transition drill. And then I always throw in some sort of movement now. So, and I'll try to shoot as much stuff on the move as I can. And typically that's what I'll do. Shoot 200-300 rounds and then call it a day. So,
have you tried Transition Hell, the Max Michel drill?
No.
Mike Seeklander and Max Michel.
Okay. No, I haven't seen that one, I don't think.
Oh man, it's brutal. It's 2 paper at a 45-degree angle at like 7-ish yards from you.
Okay.
And then a plate rack at like 15 centered between them.
Okay.
And you put 2 on the left paper, 1 plate, 2 on the right paper. So 2 on the left paper, the left plate, 2 on the right paper, the right plate, 2 on the left paper, the next left plate, 2 on the right paper, the next right plate.
Okay.
It's brutal because you're going from that easy close target at 7-ish yards.
Yeah.
To the plate rack at 15, and you got to settle the dot.
I like it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
You want to hear one that they do at the
Yeah, sure.
So okay, this one's called the drill. All right, so you got 2 plate racks. All right, 2 plate racks up front at, I don't know, maybe 15 yards, and then 2 shooting boxes up range. And so you start in one shooting box, you shoot 1 plate, you got to run to the next shooting box, shoot the next plate on the other plate rack, and you're running back and forth. And so obviously the more tired you get, let's say you miss a plate, you still got to run. Doesn't matter. But you got to run back to the next box, shoot the next plate. And so the more tired you get, the more fatigued you get.
The more you miss, the more sprints you have to do.
Yep.
Yeah, no, I like that. It's evil. I like it a lot.
Yeah, that one's called the drill. Yeah, that one's pretty bad.
I could see that getting really ugly real quick.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
What distance are they shooting the plate rack at?
Usually 10, 15, somewhere in there.
Yeah. No, that sounds rough.
Yeah, that's a good one. But yeah, I'd have to remember too, we've got a drill wall too, where it's like a whaling wall where guys with the best times on a specific drill, they'll write it up. And so some guys that kind of act like jerks. So before a guy retires, they'll try to go out there and just run those drills over and over and over to bump his name off the scoreboard. So his name's no longer on there by the time he gets out of there for retirement.
Oh, that's just wrong, man.
Yeah. That one's a pretty good one. But yeah, there's like 1 reload 1 and 5 reload 1. There's all sorts of weird stuff up there. But yeah, that's a good one.
Lately I haven't even been doing 4 aces. I've been doing, I call it a split bill where I do 3 reload 3.
Okay.
I feel like it really makes sure I'm getting a good grip. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yeah, that 4 aces, that's a tough one. That's tough. Like if you tense up or you miss that reload, you're not making the par time. But that's like MXAD too. So that one's tough. You got to shoot 6 and then 2 on 2 targets that are kind of shoulder. You're familiar with that one?
Yep. Yeah, it's a good drill too.
Yeah, that one's a good one. But I always tell people like that drill right there. So it's a vision training drill. So you got to stay out of the glass to be able to make that par time. If you're stuck in the glass, and you're watching the dot during transition, you're never going to make that par time. So you really, really have to pay attention, after that sixth shot, getting your eyes, out of the glass. If you started looking at it while it's kind of dancing around. But I tell guys, like, if they don't want to shoot that much ammo volume wise, they can do a similar thing or achieve similar goals by shooting 3 and then 2 or something similar to that. So.
Well, and it's so easy to get sucked into that dot.
Yeah, especially when you start watching it kind of dance around, bounce around. Yeah. Yeah, something I'll do too for like transition drills like that is I will take like a neon green piece of duct tape, a tiny piece, and I'll put it right on the A zone. So I know I'm looking right at that A zone, and then in transition, I'm getting my eyes off that target to the next target, and I'm getting it to a specific point on the target. I'm looking right at that A zone. And so that's just to build those reps where I'm like getting out of the glass. And sometimes I'll do that. And then other times I'll just start the drill a little bit slower. And so I'll run it a little bit slower. I'll make sure that I'm leading the gun with my eyes, getting onto that target. I'm looking at something super refined on the target instead of looking at it like a big brown blob. And my eyes are moving like they should. And then I'll slowly start ramping that speed up.
Well, and that's another failure point that's so easy to have is just looking at the wrong place on the target.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
I mean, it's so easy to do.
Yeah. You'll see a lot of the time where like guys will have two rounds stacked up right there in the C zone, and you start talking to them like, well, what were you looking at? Like, well, I think I was looking at the dot. Like, probably,
Yeah. Especially when it's a nice tight, they're manipulating the trigger just fine. They're just looking at the wrong place.
Yep. Yeah. And sometimes it happens. Yeah. Sometimes. I mean, I'll do it every once in a while. I'll find myself looking at the dot in transition.
I think for me, a lot of times, it's not even so much looking at the dot in the glass while I'm transitioning. It's just simply driving my eyes and not taking enough care to where my eyes are driving to.
Yep.
On the target.
Yep.
Especially on like a partial where your brain wants to go center of brown.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Or like if you're really used to shooting USPSA targets, and then you start shooting the hexagon turtle targets, you'll notice like your hits are way higher in the A zone on those, because the A zone on those, they actually end up like increasing in size down towards the bottom. So you actually want your point of aim quite a bit lower on those because it gives you more of a percentage to hit. So yeah, I've noticed that too sometimes if I haven't been shooting those enough. And I've been shooting a ton of USPSA as opposed to the IPSCs. I'll definitely have my groups a little higher than I want them.
And like, yeah, that for sure. And I'll see it sometimes going back and forth between USPSA and IDPA too, because of the different shape of the down zero and the A zone.
Oh, let me ask you this. So I've shot a little bit of IDPA. I'll shoot it maybe a couple matches a year, and that's if I don't have anything else to shoot. But have you noticed, if you're relatively good at USPSA, you usually place really well at IDPA?
Yeah, without a doubt.
Yeah. Why is that?
Because the training paradigm for shooting USPSA well pushes you harder. Yeah, I think.
Yeah. Okay.
I think that's what it is.
Yeah.
And not that I'm not a champion at either one by any means. But if I had any advice to somebody who wanted to be an IDPA champion, it would be train like a USPSA guy. Just aim for the top half of the A zone.
Yeah. I was thinking about maybe going to IDPA nationals or something like that just to see how I would end up placing.
It's a fun match. I've done it the last couple of years, and I like it. What'll kill you at IDPA is the procedurals. Yeah. If you're not used to the rule set, it'll kill you.
Yep. Yeah. And I've shot it enough to kind of know what the deal is. I think they're changing some of the rules a little bit too. I just saw something come out in an email.
Yeah, I saw it come out too, but I haven't looked at the new rules yet.
No, I haven't either. think the major change is you can reload behind screens, like if there's open targets and stuff. I don't know. There's a couple others, but I'll have to look into it a little bit more. But I don't shoot that discipline too much.
I like going back and forth between that and USPSA because it forces me to have a good mental transmission.
Oh, 100%. Yep. I agree with that. Yeah, big time.
And I think that's something that I've noticed all the top shooters have really at a really high level is the ability to scale their pace, their acceptable accuracy up and down based on what they're doing, just almost subconsciously. Right.
Yep.
And I think shooting different disciplines kind of gives you that exposure to that helps you develop that.
Yep. Yeah. So Aaron Edens just went out and shot PCSL nationals, and he doesn't shoot carbine, at all, really. And he did pretty damn well for shooting his, basically his first PCSL match was like, PCSL nationals. So did really, really well at that. But yeah, he was kind of talking about that a little bit, but most of the stage planning is all the same. But I mean, now you have the added complexity of adding a carbine in there, where you're going to dump it, if they have multiple dump boxes and things like that. But yeah, PCSLs is pretty good. If you haven't shot some of that, I would highly recommend it. Typically, the par times for some of those stages are anywhere from 30 to 40 seconds, some of them even longer. So the stages are much more complex as far as the stage planning and, some of that goes as far as the cognitive ability and being able to, figure out a stage plan, execute it very, very well. There's a lot more to those sort of stages than there is to, a 15, 20-second USPSA stage.
Now, here's something I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. What are your thoughts on that K-zone on the PCSL target?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I think it's good. It adds a added layer of complexity in there. And in my opinion, let's say you have some partials. Let's say you have partials on there, especially with a no shoot. Like a no shoot has some significant risk to it because that's a 10-point penalty. Plus, if you pick up a mic and a no shoot, now you're down 10 points because the 10-point penalty, and you're down 5 points because you could have had that alpha. So you're really down 15 points on one target. So to minimize that risk, if you could hit the K zone, but everything's a trade-off, because if it takes a little bit more, how deliberate you are as far as your sight picture, if it takes a little bit more time that way, it might not be worth it. So I think it's fun. I think it adds a little bit more complexity to it and a little bit more options.
I haven't shot any PCSL matches, but there's several PCSL stages in that ACE virtual reality setup.
Okay.
So I've only shot on pistol, no carbine, right? Yeah. And I find that on like close hoser targets, the K zone makes a big difference. Mm-hmm. Because it's easy to make sure you have one hit in the K zone and move on a close target.
Yeah.
On the further targets, I don't think the juice is really worth the squeeze most of the time.
No. Yeah, I do like it too, though, because they can use scaled targets. So I went and shot the PCSL GOAT. I can't remember what the acronym stands for, but this huge match down in Florida at Element. And most of the bays down there were maybe 50 yards tops. So in order to make it a little bit more complex and challenging for carbine, they used scaled targets all over the place, especially towards the back of the berms. So you're shooting a 1/8 size scaled target at 50 yards, with a carbine, and, standing. So offhand, off some barricades and stuff like that. So it was challenging. It was a fun match.
It does sound like fun.
Yeah.
I've talked to Max Leograndis a couple times at nationals.
Yeah.
He's a smart kid. Like he's got some good stuff going on with that league, I think, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all pretty practical. What I did notice too is when I went down there and shot that match, there was a ton of law enforcement and military guys shooting it. So there was such a broad array of carbines down there, and most of them were duty rifles. So a lot of guys were running their work guns and stuff like that. So it was cool to see.
Yeah, no, without a doubt. All right. So to close it out, what advice do you have for anybody out there that wants to be a better shooter? Something you got from yourself, something you got from your time with the AMU, either on the training side or on the action shooting side. What nugget of wisdom can you pass on to my listeners today?
Okay. One, I would say write down your goals. So write down what your goals are as a competitive shooter, and then start kind of breaking it down, drilling down on those, and then really identify some drills and really identify some drills and stuff that you can utilize to achieve those goals. So for me, when I first started, some of it was like, while I was on deployment. So for one of those in particular, we didn't have a range. And so what I would do is I would actually go through the Ben Stoker book, and I would dry fire. I would dry fire for about an hour and a half every single night. And so I would dry fire 45 minutes pistol, and then I would do the same exact drills, but I would do them with carbine too. So I would dry fire a ton, dry fire as much as you can, because it'll get you all the weapons manipulation stuff that you need to be proficient at a match.
That's good advice. All right. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. It's always a pleasure having Chris on. If you're interested in the AMU, definitely check it out, because it is a path to the upper levels of competitive shooting without a doubt. Mm-hmm. And I will talk to everybody again next time.
Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Way is in Training. Please come back again as we explore how training makes us better at our craft and better in our everyday lives. See all of you soon.